Hi everyone, my name is James Jacobs. I'm the Accessibility Lead here at Jadu. The release of WCAG 2.2 is fast approaching, so in this video we'll be taking a look at the latest candidate recommendation of WCAG 2.2, which is the final stage before it becomes a standard, and we'll also be looking at the recent changes to the UK's accessibility regulations and how they are related to WCAG 2.2. Okay, so first up, let's look at the regulation changes. So to reflect the UK leaving the EU, the UK's accessibility regulations were updated towards the end of 2022. There are three main changes. The first of which was that any references to EU organisations and offices, directives and standards were replaced with UK equivalents. Most importantly, the technical standard was changed from EN 301549 to just WCAG. Previously, EN 301549 was linked to WCAG 2.1. Now it's just the current recommended version of WCAG, which right now is WCAG 2.1. And it also updates in line with new versions of WCAG as they change. So I have a screenshot of some of the changes to the regulation. I'm not going to go through it all. However, the bottom part, so the Regulation 9 substitute, is probably the most relevant thing to this video. And that states that a website or mobile application of a public sector body will be presumed to be in conformity with the accessibility requirements to the extent that the website or mobile application conforms to level A and AA success criteria as set in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines recommended, which I've highlighted, by the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3C, as amended from time to time. And that recommended keyword is quite important there. The key part, as I say, is the recommended wording, as when 2.2 is finally released, which is currently expected in Q3 2023, 2.2 will become the new recommendation. Therefore, public sector websites, mobile apps, intranets and extranets will need to meet WCAG 2.2 at level AA. If you've been audited in the past by the government monitoring team, you'll be familiar with them. Essentially, that's the department of central government that monitors public sector websites for accessibility. They have said that they will start monitoring based on the new 2.2 criteria from 2024, so next year, assuming that the 2.2 publication is not further delayed. So quite a lot of information there squeezed into a couple of slides. So just a fast and easy recap of that information. So to reflect the UK leaving the EU, the UK's accessibility regulations have been updated. Most importantly, the technical standard has been changed from the previous European standard EN 301549 to the current current recommended version of WCAG, which at the moment is WCAG 2.1, and the regulations update in line with new versions of WCAG as they changed and are released. So before we get into WCAG 2.2, I thought it'd be prudent to have a little bit of a refresher on WCAG. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, these are a set of guidelines and testable rules developed and published by the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3C. And WCAG 2.0 and 2.1 are used as the basis of most accessibility laws and policies worldwide. To give you a little bit of history on WCAG, WCAG 1 was released back in 1999, 2.0 in 2008, 2.1 in 2018, and 2.2 is expected in Q3 this year, 2023. So how is WCAG structured? Well, it's structured around four principles. So perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, which you may have heard abbreviated, as it often is, to PAW. And those four principles are supported by 13 guidelines. Each guideline has multiple testable success criteria, and each success criteria has three levels of conformance, level A, level AA, and level AAA. Each success criteria also has techniques that can be used to meet that success criterion. Okay, so getting into the 2.2 updates, the easy stuff first. WCAG 2.2 builds on the requirements of WCAG 2.1, and it focuses on cognitive and learning disabilities, low vision, the mobile device experience, and more. Everything from WCAG versions 2.0 and 2.1 is included in 2.2, and all success criteria are exactly the same, with a couple of exceptions, which we'll go through. So if you've been following the development of WCAG 2.2 for a while, you may be aware that it's changed quite considerably since it was initially developed, or initially drafted, should I say. So back in 2021, we did a webinar on WCAG 2.2 and the list of new success criteria, as you can see in the left-hand side column. Fast forward to summer 2023, those look quite different. So originally back in 2021, we had focus appearance enhanced, page break navigation, dragging movements, target size, consistent help, visible control, accessible authentication, and redundant entry. Some of these have been removed, such as page break navigation and visible controls. Others have been changed level-wise. So, for example, focus appearance is now a AAA requirement, and the numbering of the success criteria has changed as well. So fast forward to now, summer 2023, we're left with 9 new success criteria. 2.4.11, focus not obscured, minimum, AA. 2.4.12, focus not obscured, enhanced, AAA. 2.4.13, focus appearance, AAA. 2.5.7, dragging movements, AA. 2.5.8, target size minimum, AA. 3.2.6, consistent help, level A. 3.3.7, redundant entry, A. 3.3.8, accessible authentication minimum, AA. 3.3.9, accessible authentication enhanced, AAA. There are also 2 changes to existing success criteria. 2.4.7 focus visible has been promoted from level AA to level A, and 4.1.1 parsing has been removed. And we'll go into detail regarding those changes towards the end of this video. So before we jump in and start looking at the new success criteria, it's worth kind of highlighting that a lot of the new success criteria, they offer multiple, sometimes quite technical techniques to meet those requirements. Therefore, rather than me just reading through the technical requirements and the different techniques, we'll be looking at a problem that each of the new success criteria attempts to solve, and then one of the more straightforward, one of the more simple techniques that can be used to meet that respective criteria where possible. Some of them will have to kind of delve into a little bit further. We are also going to take a look at the new AAA success criteria too, as these 2.2 AAA criteria are quite simple to meet. Okay, so looking at the first problem, so as a user, this web page has a big banner that's always across the bottom of the page. So for example, a sticky footer. And when I move focus to items, some items are hidden behind the banner. I can't see them. For example, I'm using the keyboard to tab through elements on a page. I get to some links in a footer, but I can't see them because there's a big cookie banner blocking the view of those elements, even when they have focus. So what works well, when I move focus to items, I can see them, and I can tell where my focus indicator is. I can tell which element currently has focus and will therefore receive keyboard input. So the first of the new success criteria is 2.4.11, focus not obscured, minimum AA. So this states that when a user interface component receives keyboard focus, the component is not entirely hidden due to author-created content. Users must be able to see which element has focus. Okay, so not entirely hidden due to author-created content. Author-created content is anything that has been basically developed by a developer. It's not something that's supplied by the browser. So users must be able to see which element has focus. I have an example here, so it's a bit of a fake screenshot. We can see that there's a cookie banner across the bottom of the page. We'll assume that that's sticky, and then as I've tabbed through the page and highlighted move focus, should I say, to a link, that element and the focus indicator is obscured by that cookies banner. So there is a link under that cookie banner, but we can't see it because of the sticky cookie banner. So the simplest solution here is really to try and not use sticky headers, footers, sidebars, etc. Instead, consider non-sticky alternatives. Consider elements that properly manage focus. So if an element is sticky, like a cookie banner, on page load, does it handle focus correctly? Does it move keyboard focus within the cookie banner and not allow you to navigate out of it until you accept or decline? Modal dialogues are a good example of this. A well-developed modal dialogue will handle focus. It will loop through there, and you won't be able to interact with the page behind it, meaning that an element cannot gain focus when it's obscured. There's also other techniques as well, getting a little bit technical, but things like CSS scroll padding, so CSS that allows for the space that these sticky elements take up as you're tabbing and scrolling through the page. So 2.4.12 Focus Not Obscured Enhanced is a AAA version of the one that we've just been through, and this is almost identical, but whereas the AA requirement says that an element can't be fully hidden when it has focus, the AAA version says it can't be partially hidden. So the example in this screenshot is that there's a link that's partially obscured when it's focused by the cookie banner. That would pass the AA requirement. Certainly not ideal, but it would pass the AA requirement, but it would fail the AAA requirement. So once again, for AA, it can't be fully obscured, and for AAA, it can't be partially obscured. Okay, so the next problem, I can't tell where the keyboard focus is as I move around the web page or app. So what works well, I can see where keyboard focus is as I move around the page or app. So this is a now AAA requirement, so 2.4.13 focus appearance. Originally, this was a AA requirement, and more recently it's been changed to AAA, which is quite a shame because it builds on some existing requirements around focus indicators and focus indicator contrast, and adds additional rules for focus indicators, such as how they enclose an element, how solid the indicator has to be, the size of it, the contrast between its focus and unfocused state, adjacent colours, and also things like the focusing of subcomponents, so things like tab panels, more complex UI components. It applies to all focusable elements, so things like links, buttons, form controls, drop-downs, etc. And it has some exemptions for complex UI components, such as WYSIWYG text areas and non-interactive elements as well that may gain focus. User agent or browser default indicators are still allowed, however, they are highly discouraged. So this one can get a little bit technical, but in its simplest form, it requires that focus indicators have an area that's at least as large as a 2-pixel thick perimeter of the unfocused component or subcomponent, and has a contrast ratio of at least 3:1 between the same pixels in the focused and unfocused state. So that's quite a lot to get your head around, but essentially it means something like this. So I have a screenshot here of a button in its unfocused state and then its focused state. In its focus state, it has a 2-pixel solid outline that fully encloses the element. It's slightly offset from the button, which results in a white background both outside the outline and between the outline and the button, which means it meets the contrast requirements against the background colours, but also against adjacent colours as well, and the requirement for the pixels used for the focus indicator to contrast with the colour that they were in their previous state. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but essentially the pixels that are used for that 2-pixel blue outline in the non-focus state are white, in the focus state the blue, and contrast requirements are met. In this screenshot, we've got quite a few examples of what would meet and what would fail this new success criteria. I'm not going to go through them all in any great detail, but just to highlight a few. So hopefully you can kind of tell there that the easiest, most visible one perhaps is the first one, the example we've just seen with that offset outline. If we were to remove that offset and lower the outline to sort of 1 pixels, that's the second example. Quite difficult to see. That would be a fail. It doesn't have to be outside the button. It can be inside as long as it meets the area requirements. We've got a yellow internal square border on the inside of the button that meets the contrast requirements, and that passes. However, if that was on the outside, it would fail because it doesn't contrast enough with the background colour. There's some other examples as well that are probably quite commonly seen, which is links that are styled as buttons or buttons where the background color changes on focus. So we have an example of a blue button which changes to a green button on focus. Because that green doesn't focus enough with the blue, then that would fail. Whereas we have an orange button that changes to a brown. Because that brown contrasts at greater than 3:1 contrast ratio with the orange, that would pass. If you dig into the success criteria, you'll also see that there are some more unusual examples, such as this example, which is a focus indicator where the indicator is a 4-pixel high, quite a long line, quite a wide line underneath the button text. And then the last example, which is vertical, thick yellow bar inside the button as well. Now, both of these do meet the success criteria requirements because of the contrast and also the area and the size of the focus indicator. Like I said, it does get a bit complicated when you get into the area of these focus indicators, but ideally you're just going to have a 2-pixel wide outline around an element that is sufficient contrast to meet this, and that's the most visible option. Okay, so the next problem, I can't hold down the mouse button and drag it accurately enough to move the items in this list. What works well, when I click on an item in the list, I get an up and down arrow and I can click those to change the order. So thinking about lists, thinking about things that you have to drag and drop to reorder, this new success criteria, so 2, 5, 7 dragging movements, a AA requirement, seeks to address that. And that states that all functionality that uses a dragging movement for operation can be achieved by a single pointer without dragging, unless dragging is essential. So by essential, we're talking about things like games, perhaps, where it's the functionality of the game. So the simplest solution here is to have a button that offers the same functionality. Some examples of this could be a map, where you have to use the mouse and click and drag to move the map around. But the map also has up, down, left, right buttons that you can interact with via the keyboard and the mouse to move the location of the map. Another example would be a drag and drop file upload, where there's an area for you to drop a file, drag a file and drop it, should I say, but it also has an upload button as well. A sortable list of items that have up and down buttons in addition to drag and drop to reorder, or thinking about things like image carousels, where you can swipe between the different images. A back and forward button would meet this requirement as well. So the next problem, so the buttons are so close together, I hit cancel when I'm going for submit, and then I lose all my information, I have to start again. So what works well is that there are more space between buttons, so I don't hit the wrong button, even when I'm, say, riding on a bumpy bus. So 258 target size minimum, a AA requirement, addresses this, and it states that targets must have a minimum area of 24 by 24 or have enough space between them. So we have a screenshot here of a row of icon buttons where each one is 24 pixels by 24. That would pass. And the second example is the same row, but they're slightly smaller now. They're 20 by 20 pixels. However, they are separated by 4 pixels between each icon. That would pass as well. An example of a failure would be the same icon buttons again that are just 20 by 20, but they aren't offset, so they're right up against each other, and that would fail. The way to test this is to draw a 24 pixel circle from the center of the bounding box of the element. And there's an easy way to do this, which I'll show you in a second. So some other examples, we have a pass example where we have some buttons that are quite wide, however, they don't meet the height requirements. However, because there are no other targets above or below them, then they pass. Again, drawing that circle in the middle of the bounding box of the element. If that circle doesn't overlap any other elements, then it's all good. An example of a fail would be where we have 2 rows of buttons where the buttons are quite wide, but they're only 16 pixels high. And then again, if you was to use that circle method, the circles would overlap other elements. One last example of a drop-down navigation menu where the About Us drop-down has been triggered and it's showing some additional links. If those links were 24 pixels high, obviously, as well as wide, then the success criteria would be met. If they are less than 24 pixels, so 18, for example, in the fail example, that circle would overlap other elements and therefore fail. There are quite a few exemptions to this success criteria. So spacing we have covered. If the elements are spaced out enough, or there's nothing above and below it, then it's okay. Equivalent, a little bit of a strange one. So if there are two controls for the same thing on the page, one of those meets this requirement, but the other one doesn't, then that's fine. Probably the most relevant exception is the inline exception, which applies to links in blocks of text. So picturing a paragraph of text with a couple of links in it, it would be very difficult to make them meet that sizing requirement. You would end up with a huge line height, especially considering how text would reflow depending on the size of the screen, the viewport width, whether it's on a mobile or a laptop, for example. User agent control, another exception. So this is anything provided by the browser. Or the last exception, which is essential, so where the presentation of a target is essential or legally required for the information being conveyed. So how to test this? So Adrian Roselli produced a fantastic little bookmarklet, which is a little bit of JavaScript that you can save as a bookmark in your browser. But when you click on, it will replace your cursor with a 24-pixel circle, which you can then use to test the elements in question. Okay, so the next problem, whenever I try to use a website to schedule my appointments, I can't remember what to do at each step. I've seen a chat option in some places, but I can't find it now. So what works well? I can easily find the chat option when I need it. It's always in the lower right-hand side corner of the page. So 326 consistent help, a level A requirement, addresses this. And that states that you should make sure options for help or support are predictably located and consistent throughout the experience. So this includes things like human contact details, so phone numbers, email addresses. If, for example, you have a phone number in your footer, that should always be in the same place across all pages. Human contact mechanisms, so contact forms, social media channels, etc., should be in the same place. Self-help options, so links to FAQ pages, that type of thing, again, should be in the same place. And fully automated contact mechanisms like chatbots, virtual assistants, live chat, that type of thing, again, needs to be in the same place. How this is actually tested, it looks at the markup of the page, so the serialized DOM of the page, to get a little bit technical. But essentially, you need to ensure that these things, these links or telephone numbers, whatever you're using, need to be in the same place in the page source. Generally, there will be. However, if you have a couple of links above the link to, say, a Contact Us page, and those links are removed on certain pages, that will change in a different, that will result in a different source page location, in which case technically it would fail this requirement. Interestingly, this success criteria doesn't require you to provide a help mechanism, but if you do, it does need to be in the same place in the page markup. Okay, so next problem. Whenever I use a website to schedule my appointments, I have to retype some information that I entered on a previous step. What works well? The form automatically fills out the information that I entered in the previous steps. So 337 redundant entry, level A. Don't make people re-enter information that they've already entered in the same session, unless the act of re-entry is needed. So the simplest solution here is, just don't ask them to re-enter the same information, or if for some reason you have to, auto-populate the previously entered information. A well-designed form should do this. There are some exceptions. When re-entering the information is essential. So thinking about when you change your password, you generally have to re-enter it twice. You have to re-enter your new password twice to make sure that the password is as you'd expect and that there aren't any errors. So that would be an exception to this. Where the information is required to ensure the security of the content, or where previously entered information is no longer valid, are the other two. Now, this is kind of already a best practice anyway, and it's commonly seen on many websites, certainly on e-commerce websites where you're ordering something. You'll typically see your billing address first, you enter the details, and then you see a tick box for delivery address is still the same as the billing address. So it's providing a mechanism that results in you not having to enter your address twice. So the next problem is I can never remember my password. It's really hard to get into this website. So what works well? A login form that allows the browser to autocomplete my sign-in details so I don't have to remember them. So 338 Accessible Authentication, level AA, that states that a cognitive function test, such as remembering a password or solving a puzzle, is not required for any step in an authentication process unless certain options are provided. So the simplest solution here is just to allow users to copy and paste credentials from third-party apps into say the sign-in page, so username and password. So if you're like me and you use a password manager, I can just copy it and paste it. If I had to view it and then manually type it out, that would be a cognitive function test, and therefore would fail this. So simplest solutions allow copy and paste on sign-in forms, which I'm sure most do, and ours certainly do, and allow browsers to auto-complete sign-in credentials. So when you land on a page and it's automatically put your username and password in, which is also needed for a separate success criteria 135 identify input purpose. So if you do one of them two, then this success criteria is met. Super simple. And what's really great is that will also meet the requirements of 339 Accessible Authentication Enhanced, which is a AAA requirement. Now, there are a couple of other options for this AA requirement. You can also use things like image recognition. So what we see with captures and recaptures, where you have to identify, buses out of a series of images, or personal content recognition. A little bit rarer, so where you've uploaded something to a site and you are the only person that could perhaps identify that that's yours. So you have to identify your own personal content. But my advice would be to follow the simplest solutions and the one that offers the best user experience, and that would be to allow users to copy and paste sign-in credentials into a login form, and also allow the browser to autocomplete sign-in credentials as well. So the AAA version of this is, as I say, more or less identical. If you allow users to copy and paste, and also the browser to autocomplete signing credentials, then this AAA version of the success criteria is met. The AAA version doesn't allow for object recognition or personal content recognition. So again, if you stick to them two easier best practice ones, then you'll also meet the AAA requirement as well. Okay, so that's it for the new success criteria. There are a couple of changes to existing criteria, which I'll just run through. So 247 Focus Visible has been promoted from level AA to A. There's no change at all to the actual success criterion. All the requirements are still the same. And 411 parsing has been removed. Lots of discussion about this online initially, a little bit controversial. However, totally makes sense. So this success criteria was kind of initially developed to address issues with HTML, so incorrectly nested HTML, missing end tags, that type of thing, when assistive technology had to directly parse HTML. So when it had to directly access the page source and parse that. These days, modern browsers, we have the DOM, again, getting a little bit technical, and also the accessibility tree. And this is typically what things like screen readers interact with. So they don't have any need to directly parse the page source, the HTML. Therefore, this success criteria is redundant. And browsers do quite a good job these days of fixing things like missing end tags and things like that. All that being said, it's still very important to validate markup. So any HTML that you are using should fully conform to specification. How to make invalid markup, so things like third-party code, cookie banners, anything that injects anything into your page, needs validating, needs to make sure it conforms, as invalid markup will very often result in other success criteria being failed. So it's still super important to make sure that the HTML you're using is valid and conforms to spec. Okay, so next steps then. So the recommended next steps from us to prepare for WCAG 2.2, we would recommend that you take some time to get familiar with the new success criteria, understand what changes you may need to make, audit your site, look for any 2.2 or existing 2.1 2.1 issues, or book an audit in with us. We can help you identify 2.2 issues and catch any 2.1 issues that may be present as well. Review your accessibility statement, check it's up to date and reflects the latest changes to WCAG. So your accessibility statement should be a living document. It should be regularly updated, at least sort of once a year, preferably more often, maybe every 6 months, to kind of reflect where you are. And speak to your vendors, speak to third parties, anything that you're using on your site that's third party code, speak to them, find out how they plan to resolve any issues, how are they tackling WCAG 2.2, is there any updates coming, and can they support you with any with any issues that you may find. Okay, thank you. So that's the end of the session. Hope you found the information in this video useful. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can contact me via email on james.jacobs@jadu.net. You can contact me via Jadu support, or you can hit me up on LinkedIn. Okay, thank you very much. Take care.